This morning, I sat down to meditate, looked at my son in the eye and said, I'm doing my meditation now. And then he shouted through the whole thing. And I ended up losing my temper with him, which I think probably is a common thing that we often see. And the truth is, I knew what my boundary is. I stated it clearly. So why did I still explode and what was the problem? And the truth is, there's a massive difference between setting a boundary and announcing one. And most of us, especially those of us who've done the work, who know the language, and who understand nervous system regulation, we're really good at the second one. But we don't even realize we're not doing the first, right? So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the difference, why it matters, and what actually has to happen for a boundary to hold. Because if you're tired of knowing your limits, but still having them constantly violated, this one's for you. So there's a big difference between stating a boundary and holding a boundary. And this is something I'm learning quite a lot about at the moment. So for example, for me, stating I'm doing my meditation now and holding the boundary of I'm doing my meditation, I help you in 10 minutes. If you interrupt, here's what happens, very different things. So most of us, we stop at the first part. So we just say I'm doing my meditation now. And we expect the outcome of the second one where we've actually clearly stated, right, this is the boundary, this is what happens if you cross it. And they're very different things. So this morning, when I was doing this and I was saying to my son, right, I'm doing a meditation now, what I didn't say to him is, this is how long my meditation lasts for. I do not want to be disturbed during doing this. And if you do disturb me for anything that is non-urgent, these are the consequences of that action. So because I didn't give him all of those clear directions, I wasn't actually really setting a boundary. I was just kind of saying, oh, I'm doing my meditation now, which means actually not very much to a 5-year-old child with autism. So I wasn't actually setting a boundary. I was just kind of like announcing that I'm doing something. And the reason we kind of do it this way around is because enforcing a boundary actually takes energy. So we have to actually be really clear. We have to really think about it, and we have to be able to kind of say, kind of clearly, this is how it works. And we have to have the kind of energy to do that. And some days you may be depleted and not have the energy. And also there's kind of a bit of old programming underneath it. So there's the belief that our needs, and I suffer from this a lot, that my needs are less important than other people's. So holding a boundary feels selfish. And because I've not really been holding boundaries for most of my life, setting a boundary is actually something I'm having to learn the right way to set a boundary so that it's clear and it's open and it's structured so that everybody knows what the situation is. And so it can feel really, really challenging. And then losing my temper is because I feel like my boundary has been violated, and that there's no consequence for violating that. And also part of it is an underlying anger at myself for not adequately setting a boundary. And so then feeling like, well, when that boundary is crossed, either the other person, so my son doesn't have any respect for me or doesn't consider me, or I am not good enough for not being able to teach him how these boundaries actually work. And a lot of that comes down to the nervous system, where I feel like I'm taking things on, so I'm absorbing these negative feelings. And the whole concept of setting a proper boundary is also scary to my nervous system, because I'm so used to not setting proper boundaries that actually setting them can cause a little bit of the fight or flight to come up. So I'm actually slightly triggered anyway before that boundary is crossed. And this morning I was trying to continue to meditate and say to him, just wait. And it was only when I kept getting pushed that I snapped. And actually this came down to, well, I needed to stop beforehand, pause my meditation, explain to him the situation, and then come back to it so I was calmer. So that was me setting boundaries with myself as well. And I think that's part of the battle, is understanding what my own boundaries are with myself and what I will tolerate, and how I actually kind of do that. And what we get stuck in, and this is kind of something that I've noticed, is a cycle of repeating. So I set a soft boundary. That boundary is violated. I absorb a little bit of that and I kind of put up with it. And then it's violated again and I maybe absorb a little bit of that. And then again, and eventually there's explosion, guilt, and repeat, because then I feel guilty about setting the boundaries. And so I get stuck in a bit of a loop of not being able to set those boundaries properly. And guilt after anger or explosion is what keeps people focused on the reaction rather than the real problem. So I will focus on, oh, I lost my temper with my son, and that becomes my sole focus, and not, hang on, the reason you lost your temper with your son is because you didn't set a proper boundary and he didn't understand what that boundary was. And so now I'm starting to see that, I'm starting to understand that, I can start to change the way I set those boundaries and know that the anger that I experienced is information. And a lot of that comes from, that guilt comes from getting angry is bad. It's something that we're taught from a very young age. And I remember having this conversation with my son when he was very young, because his dad told him it's bad to get angry. And I said to him, it's not bad to get angry. It's how you deal with that anger. It's what you do with that anger that's the problem. And so it's learning how to use anger constructively. So if I can say, right, I feel this anger, what information is that giving me? And what do I need to adjust to prevent that anger from occurring in the future? And remembering that getting angry doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a human being with real emotions and real reactions and maybe an underlying message to listen to. So this is kind of some of the things I'm thinking about when I'm enforcing boundaries and what it really looks like in real life. So before I can set a boundary, I have to ask myself, what will I do if this gets violated, right? So not get angry. What will be the consequences of this boundary being violated? And then I thought about it in advance. So I'm not reacting in the moment. I have a plan. And it doesn't have to be huge consequences. They just have to be real and something that I can follow through on, because often with kids particularly, we will set unrealistic consequences. Like I once said to my son, because he was messing about the iPad and gave it to me, if you don't give me the iPad now, you're never going to have the iPad again. And he won't remember that. And that it was not a real consequence for him, because he knew that I am not going to keep something up forever. If it was, you're not going to have the iPad for 24 hours, then it's a real consequence, because he thinks actually she can manage a day. And things like that. So it's understanding how we can set those consequences. And I'm thinking about child, but if you're talking about a partner or a family member or a friend or a work colleague, you can still have realistic consequences that you dole out, and you can explain those quite clearly. And the goal is not to punish the person that violates your boundary, because then it becomes a kind of like a tit for tat. It's about showing that is what my boundary is. Obviously, the more distant the relationship, the harder it becomes to set those consequences. But we need to be clear in our heads what those consequences are before we set the boundary. And remember that. And this is a kind of understanding the deeper truth of what it means when our boundaries are violated, when we don't set those proper boundaries. Because every time our boundary gets violated and we absorb it, okay, so we absorb that violation, a little more of our inner energy, our will, our confidence gets depleted, because we start to believe that we don't deserve boundaries, and that kind of affects our self-esteem as well. So it's a bit like, and one of the things I was saying is more of me is wasted. I feel like I'm losing part of me every time I don't get the thing that I wanted because my boundary is violated. And what happens is that then builds resentment. And that's a long term, that's quite a harsh thing to be holding on to. So this is a start, when we start to feel these feelings that we're absorbing boundary violations and we're feeling emotions around that, then it's a signal that we need to start setting stronger boundaries. And remembering to ourselves that protecting our needs is not selfish. And it's actually part of how we stay regulated enough to show up for the people that we love. So when we're setting those boundaries, setting boundaries is a radical act of self-care. So we're really caring for ourselves when we set those boundaries. But on top of that, we are caring for the people we love and the people around us as well. Because when we have strong, consistent boundaries that we know we won't allow to be crossed, one, it allows the people in our lives to know what footing they're on, so they feel more confident, but it also creates a stronger relationship. It creates a stronger bond, because they can see that you are taking care of yourself. And particularly in the case of children, I also this up, what also does is it teaches them how to set their own boundaries. Because if you show your child, and this is something my mum explained to me a long time ago, and it's taken me a long time to kind of absorb it in. But if you show your child that you don't respect your own boundaries and you allow them to constantly be pushed and walked over, then you are kind of showing them that is an acceptable way to behave. And so when they come to you as an adult and they talk about their boundaries constantly being pushed and violated, it's because that's what they've learned from you, because they learn so much more from watching you than they do from teaching. And the perfect example I can give you, and this isn't really about parenting, but when my son was learning to say please and thank you, I was kind of really against forcing him to say it every time. But I was kind of doing it just out of habit. But one of the things I did do was every time he said thank you to me, I said, you're welcome. And I never told him he had to say you're welcome. But then it got to the point where he did something once and I said, thank you. And he just looked at me and went, you're welcome, mummy, and carried on doing what he was doing because he'd seen me doing it. So he actually picked that up without any teaching at all. And it's the same with things like your boundaries and how you treat yourself, your self-respect. And you're also telling other people around you how they can treat you, because they see, oh, if this person doesn't respect their boundaries, I don't really have any respect for them. So when you get that respect from them because you're respecting yourself, it creates a stronger bond, a stronger relationship, and more coherence around everything. So that's what I would recommend for that. So if this video resonated for you, just remember to give it a like and subscribe to my channel so you get to see more of my wonderful content. And it also helps me to reach more people who need to hear this message. And if you'd like to go deeper into nervous system regulation and actually living from a regulated state rather than just knowing about it, I have a free community on School called The Sacred Reset where we work through exactly this stuff together. The link is in the description below and I'd love to see you on the inside. See you soon.